The story of Ensol by Robert and Catherine Connell Crothers inspired this program. While the book contains a detailed account of the story, we have endeavored to supplement this with interviews with people who were involved. Details of how you can obtain a copy of the book will be given at the end of the program. Down through the sands of time, mankind has resisted new ideas, even when it meant improvement in lifestyle. Scientists and inventors have been ignored, ridiculed, tortured, and even executed for promoting new ideas. Copernicus shocked his fellow clergy for suggesting the sun was the center of our galaxy instead of the Earth. Bruno was later burned at the stake for promoting the same theory. Galileo was forced, under torture, to recant his belief in the Copernican theory before being imprisoned for the rest of his life. Ignaz Semmelweis had a nervous breakdown and finally went insane when he failed to convince his colleagues to wash their hands and surgical instruments before performing operations. Pasteur and Lister faced controversy at every turn as they promoted immunization and the need for antiseptic surgery procedures. Sister Kenny was shunned by much of the establishment for the unconventional procedures she used for treating polio patients, despite the fact that her patients showed a better degree of recovery over the patients treated by conventional methods. Jonas Salk was accused of being a kitchen sink scientist. Henry Connell was labeled a well-meaning quack and more of a charlatan than a researcher. Never heard of Henry Connell? Stay tuned. The time was the early 30s. The place, a small laboratory at Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario. Dr. Henry Connell, an ear, eyes, nose and throat specialist, is working on an enzyme solution for dissolving cataracts. Meeting with a measure of success, he turns his attention to developing such a solution for the treatment of cancer. On July 17, 1935, after 5 years of research, the local paper announced the discovery of Ensol, an enzyme solution for the treatment of cancer. This announcement was picked up by the media across Canada and the United States and beyond. Ensol was being provided without charge to cancer patients, which put a strain on the budget. To augment research dollars, an arrangement was reached with the Franklin Institute of Philadelphia, allowing them to manufacture and distribute Ensol in the United States under the name of Rex. By January 1936, Dr. Connell had a research staff of 27 full and part-time workers. People flocked to Kingston for treatment in such numbers that Queen's students complained about the lack of accommodation. On March 30th, 1938, Ensol made headlines again, but this time the news was not good. 10 people had died in Florida from a contaminated vial of the serum. Catherine Connell Crothers tells of her father's reaction to the news.
I saw my father cry only once. It was a Wednesday morning, March the 30th, 1938. He sat with his head in his hands at the breakfast table, his cheeks wet with tears. The usual family discussion about the radio news of the day with my Uncle Ken wasn't taking place. I couldn't believe that my wonderful father, who wiped other people's tears and solved their problems, including mine, was crying.
At first, the press announced that the Connell Research Foundation was responsible, but after a few days, it was correctly reported that the Franklin Institute was the culprit. Dr. Connell's daughter continues the story.
It took several days to prove that the contaminated vial was Rex, and that it had been produced by the research lab in the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia and not Ensol from the Henry Connell Research Foundation lab. When researching these stories, we were unable to find any follow-up other than the initial announcement of the 10 deaths in Orlando. When in Philadelphia, reviewing the newspapers of that date, we discovered, with the exception of that 1 week, March the 31st and April the 3rd, when the tragedy struck, we could not uncover any further reporting. The Franklin Institute said they did not have anything in their archives concerning Rex. We and others who know this story fear there was a complete cover-up and payoff to the survivors of the 10 victims in Orlando.
Despite the retraction, the reputation of the Connell Research Foundation was permanently damaged. Financial support all but dried up, but Dr. Connell's belief in what he was doing compelled him to carry on using much of his own resources. He even sold his beloved boat, which he had built himself. Eventually, Dr. Connell was forced to resume his practice, and in November 1951, in an attempt to ensure a continuing supply of Ensol, an agreement was made with Baxter Laboratories in Chicago to take over its production. Despite what appears to be an expanding demand for the product, Baxter ceased production after several years, and Ensol died.